You're standing on the deck of the Marlena June, 40 miles off the coast near Ketchikan, Alaska, at 5:10 in the morning. The wind is cutting sideways, salt spray hitting your face every time the boat rolls. Your gloves are frozen stiff at the fingertips. You've been awake for 19 hours straight, resetting crab pots one after another, hands raw from rope burn. The deck boss yells for the next pot. You don't answer. You just move. Below deck, in a duffel bag nobody else has ever opened, there's a tackle box. Inside that tackle box, taped down now because the tape is the only thing holding it together, is a plastic tag from a life vest you wore when you were 6 years old. Nobody on this boat knows why you keep it. Nobody on this boat knows the number sitting in an account back on land either. $1.8 million, built quietly over 8 years while every single person around you assumed you were broke. You grew up thinking broke was normal. Desmond, the man who raised you, ran a small boathouse on a budget so tight he counted diesel in gallons instead of dollars. You learned to patch your own boots before you learned to drive. You learned to eat what didn't sell instead of throwing it out. Nobody taught you these things as lessons. They were just how the house worked. The pot comes up light this haul, barely worth the diesel burned getting to it. Silas, working the rail next to you, curses under his breath and checks his phone, waiting on a text about financing a new truck he can't actually afford yet. You don't check your phone. You don't have anything you're waiting to hear. Your hands are moving before your brain catches up. Coil the line, reset the bait, signal the winch. Muscle memory. The same motion you've made 10,000 times. The cold stopped bothering you somewhere around season 4. Now it's just weather. Back on land, in a rental with secondhand furniture nobody's ever seen you buy new. There's a bank statement folded into eighths in a drawer under some old flannel shirts. Nobody's ever gone looking for it. Nobody's ever had a reason to. You think about Desmond sometimes, standing on the dock the way he used to when you were small, hands in his coat pockets, waiting for the boat to come in. He still does that now, some seasons. He still doesn't know the number. He's never asked, and you've never told him. And somewhere along the way that silence stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like the only way you know how to live. The next pot comes up. Heavy this time. Somebody laughs, calls it a good one. You laugh too, because that's what you're supposed to do. Nobody here has any idea what you're actually worth. Not the deck boss. Not Silas. Not even Desmond, standing on that dock, waiting. You were 6 years old the first time Desmond handed you a life vest that was 2 sizes too big. The boathouse smelled like diesel and wet rope, and the water outside was the color of old nickel. Desmond didn't hug you when your mother left you with him that winter. He just zipped the vest up to your chin, tied the strap twice for good measure, and said, "You don't go on the water without this." Not once. Not ever. That was the whole conversation. That was also, in a way, the whole childhood. The boathouse sat at the edge of a small inlet outside Ketchikan, a wooden building with a tin roof that rattled every time it rained, which in that part of Alaska was most days. Desmond ran it alone, repairing outboard motors, patching hulls, selling bait to fishermen who came through in the summer. He never called himself poor. He called it running lean. Running lean meant patched boots instead of new ones. It meant dinner was whatever didn't sell that day. Bruised fish, cracked crab shells, the parts other buyers wouldn't take. The object that defined those years wasn't the boat, and it wasn't the boathouse. It was a rusted metal tackle box Desmond kept under his workbench, the kind with 3 fold-out trays and a busted latch he'd wired shut with a twist tie. Inside it wasn't tackle at all. It was where he kept the boathouse's cash, folded into small stacks, hidden under a layer of actual fishing lures in case anyone ever broke in looking for something to steal. You watched him count that box on the first of every month, lips moving silently, never once complaining out loud about what wasn't there. There was a man named Griggs who used to come by the boathouse every few weeks, a supplier who sold Desmond bait in bulk. Griggs had a boat twice the size of anything Desmond owned, a truck that still had the dealer sticker in the window, and a habit of looking around the boathouse like he was doing Desmond a favor, just standing in it. "You'll never get ahead running lean like this," Griggs told Desmond once. Right in front of you. Like you weren't even standing there holding a bucket of bait. Lean don't build nothing. Lean just keeps you standing still. Desmond didn't argue. He just took Griggs's money, counted it twice, and went back to patching the outboard motor he'd been working on before Griggs walked in. Your bottom number, the number that meant something later, came the year you turned 15. You'd saved for 11 months doing odd jobs around the marina, scrubbing hulls, hauling ice, running bait buckets for tourists who tipped in loose change. You had exactly $40 saved in an envelope taped under your mattress, and Desmond's boat engine seized up 2 weeks before the season opener. He didn't ask you for the money. You gave it to him anyway, all $40, because it was the only real money either of you had between you, and the engine mattered more than anything you could have bought with it. He never mentioned the $40 again. Not once, not for years. But you noticed that winter he started leaving an extra can of soup on your side of the shelf, unlabeled, unspoken, like it was just always supposed to be there. You learned to read a balance sheet before you learned to drive a truck, because Desmond made you help him count the tackle box money every month starting at age 12. You learned that money disappearing quietly, a little at a time, was normal. You learned that money appearing was rare enough to remember for years. Nobody ever sat you down and explained saving, or interest, or debt. You just watched a man run a boathouse lean for 30 years, and somewhere in there, without either of you noticing it happening, the lesson took root. You left the boathouse at 18 with $200, a duffel bag, and a deckhand job on a boat called the Millionaire, working the crab and salmon seasons out of Ketchikan. The pay was brutal hours for decent money, but decent money spent fast if you let it, and you'd watched Desmond run lean long enough to know exactly how not to let it. The first season, you made $9,400 total after the boat took its cut. Most deckhands blew through their season pay by the time the next one started. New trucks, new gear, bar tabs that added up faster than anyone tracked. You didn't. You kept $8,150 of that first $9,400. Living on the boat during the season, and in a shared bunkhouse the rest of the year, splitting rent 4 ways, so your share came to $140 a month. Silas started the same season you did, same boat, same pay. Silas financed a Ford F-250 before he'd even finished his first full season. 6 months into the job, $612 a month plus insurance. He told everyone it was an investment in looking legit, for when he eventually ran his own boat someday. You didn't say anything. You kept wearing the same rain jacket you'd bought secondhand at a marine surplus store for $22, patch sewn over a tear in the shoulder by Desmond's old hand-crank sewing machine. You didn't open a savings account at a bank. You didn't trust banks the way Desmond never trusted them either. Instead, you bought a small fireproof lockbox and kept it bolted under your bunk, and every season, after the boat's cut and after the bunkhouse rent, whatever was left went straight into that box before you could talk yourself out of it. Season 2, the box held $19,300. Season 3, $34,800. Nobody on the boat ever saw the box. Nobody ever asked why you never seemed to need anything. Silas asked once, halfway through season 3, why you never came out drinking after a good haul. You told him you were tired. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that a night out cost anywhere from $40 to $80, and you'd rather watch that number sit in the lockbox than watch it disappear across a bar in Ketchikan. By season 4, the deck boss started giving you more responsibility. Running the hydraulic winch, training new deckhands, small raises that came without asking because you'd never once complained about a bad haul or a long shift. Your pay per season crept up, $11,200, then $14,600, then $17,900 by season 5. Every raise went the same place the last one did. You never once upgraded your gear beyond what safety required. You never once financed anything. Silas, meanwhile, was 3 payments behind on the F-250 by season 4, working extra shifts hauling gear for other boats just to cover the note. He still called your rain jacket trash, every chance he got. You still wore it. Season 6, you did something you'd never done before. You took the money out of the lockbox, all $61,000 of it sitting there after 5 years, and moved it into a low-cost index fund at a brokerage you'd researched quietly during off-season nights in the bunkhouse, reading library books on investing because you didn't want anyone at the marina to see what you were looking up on a shared computer. You didn't tell Desmond. You didn't tell Silas. You didn't tell anyone. The fund grew on its own, season after season, while your outward life stayed exactly the same jacket, same bunk, same lockbox habit for whatever cash you kept on hand. By season 7, the fund had grown past $140,000, mostly from raises and market growth compounding quietly, while you kept doing the only thing you knew how to do. Show up, work the winch, coil the rope, and say nothing. But here's the part nobody saw coming. Season 7, 6 weeks before the season opener, diesel prices spiked hard across the whole Alaska fishing fleet, nearly 40% in under 2 months. Boat owners across Ketchikan started pulling back, some canceling runs entirely, some selling off older vessels rather than eat the fuel cost. The Marlena June's owner called a meeting on the dock, telling the crew flat out that this season might run shorter, might run leaner, might not run at all if fuel kept climbing. Silas panicked. He was 4 payments behind on the F, $250 by then, the note ballooning past $700 a month once the dealership added a penalty for late payments, and a shortened season meant a smaller check standing between him and the truck getting repossessed. He started picking up extra shifts loading gear for other crews at the marina, anything to scrape together enough to stay current. You watched him do the math out loud at the bunkhouse table one night, dividing his season pay by the payments he owed, coming up short every single time he ran the numbers. You didn't panic. You didn't need to. The lockbox cash you still kept on hand for emergencies, separate from the brokerage account nobody knew about, held enough to cover 6 months of your bunkhouse rent without touching a single dollar of the fund. You didn't say any of this out loud. You just kept coiling rope, kept training the new deckhand who'd replaced last season's dropout, kept showing up exactly the way you always had. 3 weeks into the delayed season, the owner announced the boat would run after all, just shorter, just leaner. Half the crew from neighboring boats didn't make it back. Some quit outright, some got let go when their boats didn't sail at all. Silas made it back onto the Marlena June, but barely, and only after asking the deck boss for an advance on his first paycheck just to make a truck payment before the bank called again. Nobody at the marina understood how you'd made it through the same fuel spike without so much as mentioning it. Nobody understood because you'd spent 7 years building something underneath the surface that didn't show up anywhere anyone could see it. Not in your truck because you didn't have one, not in your gear because it was the same gear you'd had for years, not in your jacket, still the same $22 marine surplus coat with Desmond's stitching on the shoulder. That was the season you realized the 5 habits you'd built without ever naming them weren't just keeping you afloat. They'd quietly built something enormous while everyone around you assumed you were exactly as broke as you looked. By season 8, the fund had crossed past where you ever thought it would go, and none of it happened by accident. It happened because of 5 habits, built one at a time, none of them dramatic enough for anyone to notice. Habit 1. You never financed anything. Not the truck Silas had, not a boat of your own, not gear, not furniture. You worked with borrowed or second-hand equipment for the first 6 years on the Marlena June. And when you finally did buy your own set of rain gear in season 7, you paid the full $340 in cash, at once from the lockbox. No payments. No interest. No note hanging over a season that might run short. Habit 2. You automated every raise before you saw it. Every time your per-season pay went up, from $9,400 to $11,200 to $14,600 and beyond. The increase went straight into the brokerage account the same week it hit your account. You never let yourself get used to spending it first. The deck boss gave you a bump in season 5 without you asking, and by the time you noticed the extra money, it was already gone into the fund. Habit 3. You kept your living cost under a fixed line. Splitting bunkhouse rent 4 ways kept your share around $140 to $180 a month for nearly 8 years, even as your pay climbed past 6 figures a season. You never moved into a bigger place. You never told the other 3 guys splitting rent with you what your season pay actually was, and none of them ever asked. Habit 4. You bought secondhand and said nothing about it. The rain jacket, patched by Desmond's sewing machine. The boots, resold twice instead of replaced. A gently used truck tarp you picked up off another deckhand who was upgrading his gear. You never explained why. You never needed to. Nobody at the marina asks a deckhand why his gear looks worn. Worn gear just looks like work. Habit 5. You never told a single person your real numbers. Not Silas. Not the deck boss. Not Desmond. Especially not Desmond. You let everyone around you believe exactly what your jacket and your lockbox and your bunkhouse rent implied. That you were getting by same as them, nothing more. Currently, the average American household carries $6,501 in credit card debt while holding less than 1 month's expenses in savings, according to National Household Debt Reporting. You never carried a cent of revolving debt in 8 years on the water. While Silas dug deeper into a truck note that outlived 2 seasons of work, your fund kept compounding in total silence, climbing from $140,000 in Season 7 to just under $1.8 million by Season 8, without a single person on that boat noticing anything had changed. The cost was never the jacket. It was never the lockbox or the secondhand boots or 8 years of silence wrapped around every dollar you put away. The real cost showed up in Season 8, on a Tuesday, 3 days into a run with no signal on the satellite phone. Desmond had a stroke, alone, in the boathouse kitchen. Nobody knew for almost 2 full days. He still lived there by then, same as always, running the place lean the way he'd run it your whole childhood. A supplier making a delivery found him on the kitchen floor. The stove still on, a pan burned dry, Desmond unconscious beside it. By the time the ambulance got him to the hospital in Ketchikan, by the time anyone thought to try reaching you, you were 40 miles offshore resetting crab pots with a phone that hadn't had signal in 3 days. You found out standing on the dock, still in your bibs, duffel bag over one shoulder, boots still wet from the last washdown of the trip. The deck boss handed you his own phone without a word, because word had already reached him before it reached you. 2 days. Desmond had been in a hospital bed for 2 days while you were out there coiling rope, completely unaware, because you'd built a life that ran on silence. And for the first time, that silence had worked against you instead of for you. You called the hospital before you called anyone else. Before you even set the duffel bag down. You stood on that dock with the phone pressed hard against your ear, asking a nurse questions in a voice that didn't sound like your own. Is he stable? Is he talking? Does he know where he is? He survived. That part matters, and you remind yourself of it the way you double-check a knot you already know is tied right. But surviving isn't the same as coming back whole. The stroke took strength from his right hand, not all of it, but enough. Enough that the same hand that had zipped your life vest up to your chin when you were 6 years old, tied twice for good measure, doesn't fully close around a coffee mug anymore. Enough that he stops halfway through tying his own boots and has to start over. You sat with him during recovery, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and vending machine coffee, and for the first time in your entire relationship with him, you almost told him. Almost said the number out loud. $1.8 million, sitting quietly in an account he had no idea existed, built from every habit he'd taught you without ever once meaning to teach a lesson about money at all. You almost told him you could cover anything, any specialist, any treatment, any comfort, without either of you thinking twice about the cost. You didn't say it. Not because you were ashamed of it, and not because 8 years of silence was stronger than the moment deserved. You didn't say it because Desmond was already asking you, in a voice thinner than you'd ever heard from him, whether you'd taken time off work for this, whether the boat would be fine without you, whether you were going to be okay covering the hospital parking fees. The same man who raised you running lean, who never once complained about hardship out loud, was lying in a hospital bed worried about your parking. That's when you understood what the 5 habits had actually cost you. Not money. You'd never lost money, not once in 8 years. What they cost you was 2 days of not knowing. 2 days where a working phone might have meant a faster trip back to shore. Might have meant standing in that kitchen instead of on that deck. Might have meant a hand that still closes all the way around a coffee mug. You never told him the number. Not that week, not that year. Some habits, once they're load-bearing, don't come apart just because you finally have a good enough reason to let them. Knowing doesn't make the looking any easier. That's the part nobody warns you about when you spend 8 years building a life designed to look like the exact opposite of what it actually is. Desmond is fine now, as fine as he's going to get. His grip never fully came back, but he still comes down to the dock sometimes when the Marlena June comes in. Standing in the same spot he stood in when you were 6, hands shoved in his coat pockets, so nobody notices the way his right one doesn't sit flat anymore. He still doesn't know the number. You've had a dozen chances to tell him since the hospital, and every time, something in you defaults back to the same silence that built the whole thing in the first place. You still fish 2 seasons a year. Not because you need to. You crossed that line somewhere around season 8, back when the fund quietly passed a number that would have let you walk away from the boat forever and never think about crab pots again. You keep going because the water is the only place where the gap between how you look and what you actually have makes any sense to you anymore. On land, around people who don't know, you'd just be a wealthy man pretending not to be. On deck, you're just a deckhand. The pretending isn't work out here. It's just Tuesday. The tackle box is still in your bunk. The life vest tag is still inside it, taped now instead of loose, because the tape's the only thing keeping it from falling apart after 2 decades of salt air. You've never told anyone what it means to you either. Some things get their own silence, separate from the money entirely. Silas is out of the industry now. Word around the marina is he's driving forklift shifts at a warehouse outside Anchorage. Steady work, nothing dramatic, the kind of ending most people get after a bad stretch rather than a good one. You don't think about him much. When you do, it's not with resentment. It's closer to recognition. He wanted to look rich, and for a while he did. You wanted to look broke, and for 8 years you did too. Only one of those was ever actually true. The pot comes up heavy this haul. Worth mentioning to the crew, worth a rare joke from the deck boss about you finally earning your keep. You laugh along with everyone else. You coil the last line of the trip the same way you've coiled every line for over a decade, hand over hand, no wasted motion, muscle memory doing what muscle memory does. You step off the boat at the dock. Somebody calls out, asking if you're coming to the bar tonight. First round on them since the haul was good. You say maybe, knowing you won't, knowing you'll go back to a rental that still has secondhand furniture in it, still has a rain jacket with a patch on the shoulder hanging by the door, still has a bank statement folded into eighths where nobody will ever think to look for it. You lock the door of the dock office behind you, same as always.